Welcome back to Dark Avis. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into the shadowy heart of America's most infamous hiking trail, the Appalachian Trail. Before we begin, if you're new here, we document the strange, the terrifying, and the unexplained from America's wilderness areas. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. What if the most popular hiking trail in America is hiding something that no amount of experience can prepare you for? Something that sings from caves that don't exist and walks among us wearing faces that aren't quite right. Stuar orientage CGE Kavis. My name is Marcus, and I've been an experienced backcountry hiker for over 15 years. I've walked trails from the Pacific Crest to the Continental Divide, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on the Appalachian Trail during October of 2019. I was doing a solo section hike through Tennessee, specifically through a remote stretch near the North Carolina border. The weather forecast had been perfect, crisp autumn air, clear skies, and that beautiful foliage that draws photographers from all over the world. I'd planned a 5-day trek, staying at established shelters along the way. The first 2 days were exactly what I'd hoped for. The trail was moderately challenging, the views were spectacular, and I only encountered a handful of other hikers. On the third day, I decided to take a detour. There was an old, barely maintained side trail marked on my map that led to a series of limestone caves. The notation said they were worth seeing, and since I had extra time, I figured why not. The side trail was overgrown, clearly not used much anymore. Branches scraped against my pack as I pushed through dense underbrush. After about 2 miles, the forest opened up to a rocky outcropping, and I could see the dark mouths of several cave entrances carved into the hillside. They weren't large, maybe 6 feet high at most, but there were at least a dozen of them visible from where I stood. I approached the nearest cave, pulling out my headlamp. The entrance was partially obscured by vines and moss, giving it an ancient, forgotten quality. As I stood there deciding whether to explore, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Singing. It was faint, almost like a whisper carried on the wind, but it was definitely singing. Female voices, maybe 3 or 4 of them, harmonizing in a way that sounded both beautiful and deeply wrong. The melody was unfamiliar, not quite a hymn, not quite a folk song, but something in between, and it was coming from inside the caves. My first thought was that other hikers had set up camp inside, maybe a group of women enjoying the acoustics, but something about the sound didn't sit right. It was too perfect, too synchronized, and there was a quality to it that I can only describe as inhuman. The voices had a resonance that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. I called out, "Hello, anyone there?" The singing stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind, no insects, just dead air that pressed against my eardrums like I was underwater. Then, one by one, I heard footsteps. Not from one cave, but from all of them. Slow, deliberate footsteps that echoed in perfect unison, moving toward the cave entrances. I counted the rhythm in my head: step, pause. Whatever was making those sounds was coordinating their movements. I didn't wait to see what emerged. I turned and ran back down that overgrown trail faster than I've ever run in my life. Branches whipped across my face. My pack bounced painfully against my spine, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, the singing started again, but this time it was angry. The harmonies had become discordant, clashing against each other in a way that physically hurt to hear. I burst back onto the main trail and kept running until my lungs felt like they were going to burst. When I finally stopped, gasping for air and checking behind me, there was nothing. No followers, no singing, just the normal sounds of the forest returning. Here's the thing that really terrifies me. When I got back to civilization and looked at my map more carefully, I couldn't find any notation about caves. Nothing. I even went to the local ranger station and asked about limestone caves in that area. The ranger looked at me confused and said there weren't any significant cave systems along that section of trail. According to him, the geology was all wrong for it. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and sometimes late at night I still hear those voices in my dreams, singing that wrong melody that no human throat should be able to produce. I've never gone back to that part of the trail, and I never will. Okay. But Marcus's experience was just the beginning. What Jennifer encountered next will make you question whether the people you're hiking with are actually human at all. Sati double the fasastelka. This account comes from a woman named Jennifer who was through hiking the Appalachian Trail in the spring of 2016. She was traveling with a hiking partner named Melissa, and they'd been on the trail for about 3 weeks when this incident occurred. Jennifer's written account reads, "Melissa and I had developed a good rhythm by our 3rd week. We'd wake up at dawn, hike until early afternoon, then set up camp and relax for the evening. We weren't trying to break any speed records, we just wanted to enjoy the experience and take in the scenery. One particular night, we'd set up our tents near a shelter in Virginia. There were a few other hikers there, a couple from Vermont, and a solo guy who was doing a section hike. We all shared dinner together, swapped trail stories, and turned in early. The shelter was full, so Melissa and I had pitched our tents about 50 yards away in a flat clearing. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps crunching on leaves. Not unusual, people get up to use the bathroom all the time. But these footsteps were different. They were fast, almost jogging pace, and they were getting closer. I unzipped my tent flaps slightly and peered out. What I saw defied explanation. There was a figure moving along the trail, but it wasn't walking normally. It was moving in this strange, jerky manner, like a video that's skipping frames. 1 second it would be 20 feet away, the next it would be 10 feet closer, but I never saw the actual movement between positions. It's like my brain couldn't process the transition. The figure looked human, shaped but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at angles that didn't match human anatomy. It was dressed in what looked like hiking clothes, a backpack, pants, boots, but everything about it was just slightly off. The proportions were wrong. As it got closer, I could see its head turning, scanning the area like it was looking for something. When it faced my direction, I saw that where its face should be, there was just darkness. Not shadow, not a mask, just an absence of features, like someone had erased that part of reality. It stopped directly between my tent and Melissa's, just stood there perfectly still, head slowly rotating like a security camera. I was frozen, not even breathing, praying it wouldn't notice me. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. It leaned down, not bent, but leaned like its spine was made of rubber, and pressed that featureless face right up against the side of Melissa's tent. I could see the fabric indent where its face should be touching. It stayed like that for at least 30 seconds, completely motionless. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it straightened up and continued down the trail in that same jerky, impossible way. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat there clutching my knife, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I immediately went to check on Melissa. She was still asleep, completely unaware of what had happened. I told her everything over breakfast. She believed me. She could see how shaken I was, but she hadn't experienced it herself. We asked the other hikers if they'd seen anything, but they all said no. The couple had slept through the night, and the solo guy said he'd gotten up once around midnight to pee, but hadn't seen anything unusual. We seriously considered getting off the trail right then, but we'd invested so much into this hike already. We decided to continue, but with a new rule. We'd only camp at popular shelters with lots of other people around. We finished the trail without another incident, but I never felt truly safe again. The worst part, 2 months after we finished, I was scrolling through an online forum for Appalachian trail hikers, and I found a post from 2011. Someone described seeing the exact same things: a jerky, impossibly tall figure with no face moving along the trail at midnight. Same location, same description, everything. And in the comments, 3 other people said they'd seen it too, all at different times, all in that same section of Virginia Trail. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, still walking that trail at midnight, still looking for something. I just hope it never finds what it's searching for. If you thought faceless entities were terrifying, wait until you hear about the ancient oak tree that feeds on hikers every 7 years like clockwork, and the pattern suggests the next feeding is coming soon. This story was told to me by an older gentleman named Robert, who had been a trail maintainer for a volunteer organization in Pennsylvania during the 1990s. He has since passed away, but his daughter gave me permission to share his account. Robert wrote, "In the summer of 1997, I was responsible for maintaining a 15-mile stretch of trail in central Pennsylvania. It wasn't glamorous work, clearing fallen trees, marking paths, maintaining water sources, but I enjoyed it. Got me out of the house, kept me active, and I felt like I was contributing something meaningful. There was this one spot along my section, though, that always made me uncomfortable. It was a sharp bend in the trail where the path made a 90-degree turn around a massive old oak tree. The tree had to be at least 300 years old, with a trunk so wide that 3 people couldn't have linked arms around it. Someone had carved initials into it decades ago, but the letters were so old and overgrown that they were barely legible. The area around that tree always felt wrong. Temperature would drop noticeably when you got close, even on hot summer days. Animals avoided it, no birds nesting nearby, no squirrels, not even insects, and hikers would often mention feeling watched when they passed it. One August afternoon, I was doing my regular maintenance rounds when I came across a hiker sitting beneath that oak tree. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a full pack and expensive-looking gear, but something about him seemed off. His clothes were muddy and torn, his face was scratched up pretty badly, and he had this wild, desperate look in his eyes. I approached him and asked if he was okay. He looked at me like he hadn't seen another person in weeks, even though there's a popular shelter less than 2 miles from that spot where dozens of hikers pass through daily. "I can't leave," he said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "It won't let me leave." I asked him what he meant, and he told me the strangest story. He said he'd gotten lost 3 days earlier, went off trail to pee, and couldn't find his way back. He'd wandered for hours before ending up at this tree. When he tried to continue hiking, he'd somehow ended up back at the same tree over and over again. No matter which direction he walked, he'd always end up back here within 30 minutes. Now, I've been in those woods my entire life. It's not a particularly confusing area. The trail is well marked, and even if you get turned around, you should be able to find your way back or at least reach a road within a few hours. But this kid seemed genuinely terrified. I told him I'd lead him back to the main trail myself. We started walking, and I was very careful to mark our path and keep track of our direction. But here's where it gets strange. After about 20 minutes of hiking, I looked back to check on him, and he was gone. Just vanished. I called out for him, searched the area, but there was no sign of him anywhere. I figured maybe he'd sprinted ahead or took a bathroom break without telling me, so I continued to the shelter to see if he'd shown up there. He hadn't. I reported the missing hiker to the rangers, gave them a description, but they never found anyone matching it. No missing person reports came in, no abandoned vehicles at nearby trailheads, nothing. A week later, I was back at that same oak tree for maintenance, and I found something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the bark, fresh enough that sap was still oozing from the cuts, was a message. "The tree takes one every 7 years, it took me. Don't make a trade." I immediately reported this to the rangers, but they dismissed it as vandalism or a prank. But I knew better. I did some research at the local library, looking through old newspaper archives, and I found a pattern. Every 7 years, going back to at least the 1940s, someone would go missing in that exact area. Not just any disappearance. These were experienced hikers, people who knew the woods, who had proper equipment and supplies. And they all vanished near that oak tree, with no body ever found. 1947, 1954, 1968, 1982, 1989, 1996. The pattern was consistent in 1997, and when I met that young hiker would have been the next cycle. The most disturbing part. In 1989, the missing hiker was eventually found, not alive, but his body was discovered 8 years later in 1997, leaning against that oak tree like he'd just sat down for a rest. The coroner determined he'd only been dead for a few hours, even though he'd been missing for 8 years. The explanation was that animals had preserved the body, that it was a cold weather phenomenon, but anyone who saw the body said it looked like he died that same day. I stopped maintaining that section of trail after that summer and told the organization I was too old, needed to cut back on physical activity. But the truth was I couldn't go near that tree anymore. And every 7 years I checked the news reports 2004, 2011, 2018. Each time, someone disappears in that same area. We're coming up on 2025 now. If the pattern holds, someone will vanish near that tree this summer. I've tried warning people, tried getting the trail rerouted, but no one listens. They think I'm just a paranoid old man. But I know the truth. That tree is hungry and it's patient. It'll wait another 7 years, and another 7 after that, feeding on whoever is unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Whatever you do, if you're hiking in central Pennsylvania and you come across a massive oak tree with a sharp bend in the trail, don't stop. Don't rest. And for God's sake, don't make a trade. As terrifying as Robert's account is, at least that tree only claims victims every 7 years. But what Thomas discovered suggests that some horrors on the trail operate on a completely different timeline, one where you can spend the night in a place that stopped existing 30 years ago. This account comes from a hiker named Thomas who had this experience in 2018 while doing a section hike through North Carolina. Thomas's statement: I'd been planning my Appalachian Trail section hike for months. I'm not a novice, I'd done plenty of backpacking trips before, but this was my first time on the AT. I was excited and maybe a little overconfident. My plan was to hike from Hot Springs, North Carolina to Irwin, Tennessee over the course of 5 days. It's a beautiful section with some challenging elevation changes, but nothing I thought I couldn't handle. I'd plotted out where I'd spend each night, memorized the locations of shelters and campsites, and packed everything I needed. Day 3 was when everything went wrong. I'd been making good time, maybe even better than expected, and I reached what I thought was my planned shelter around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was still up. I had plenty of daylight left, but I was tired and figured I'd just settle in early, enjoy a hot meal, and get a good night's sleep. The shelter was empty when I arrived, which wasn't unusual for a Wednesday in September. It looked like a standard AT shelter: 3 wooden walls, an open front, a raised sleeping platform, a fire pit out front. There was even a trail register book, which I signed with my trail name and the date. I set up my sleeping bag on the platform, cooked dinner, and watched the sunset. Everything seemed normal. As twilight faded to darkness, I climbed into my sleeping bag and dozed off. I woke up around midnight to the sound of voices, muffled conversation, like people talking quietly so as not to disturb other sleepers. I figured other hikers had arrived late and were trying to be considerate. I didn't open my eyes, just tried to go back to sleep. But the voices didn't stop. They kept talking, the same low murmur, going on and on. After about 10 minutes, I realized something strange. I couldn't make out any actual words. It was just sound, vocal inflections without language. Like listening to a conversation in a dream, where you understand the meaning without comprehending the words. I opened my eyes and immediately knew something was very wrong. The shelter was full of people. At least a dozen figures were crowded onto the sleeping platform, all facing away from me, all having this soundless conversation. They were dressed in old-fashioned hiking clothes, canvas packs, leather boots, wool shirts, the kind of gear you'd see in photos from the 1950s or 60s. I tried to move, to sit up, but I was paralyzed. Not sleep paralysis, I was fully awake and aware. I just couldn't make my body respond. All I could do was watch as these figures continued their silent conference. Then, one by one, they turned to face me, and where their faces should have been, there was just smooth skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank expanses of flesh that somehow conveyed they were looking directly at me. They all stood up simultaneously in perfect synchronization, and began walking toward the edge of the shelter. Not toward the open front, but toward the back wooden wall. And they didn't stop. They walked right through the wall like it wasn't there, disappearing one after another until I was alone again. The moment the last figure vanished, I could move again. I grabbed my stuff, didn't even bother rolling up my sleeping bag properly, just stuffed it into my pack and ran. I used my headlamp to follow the trail markers, hiking through the night until I reached the next shelter around dawn. There were 2 other hikers there, and I must have looked like absolute hell, because they immediately asked if I was okay. I told them everything, and they exchanged glances that clearly said they thought I'd lost my mind. But then one of them, an older guy who'd been hiking the AT for years, asked me to describe the shelter I'd stayed in. I gave him details: the shape, the fire pit, the trail register book. His face went pale. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was the same shelter, but the photo was dated 1983. According to him, that shelter had been torn down and replaced in 1985 after it had become structurally unsound. The new shelter was built a quarter-mile down the trail. I'd somehow spent the night in a shelter that hadn't existed for over 30 years. The worst part, when I went back later that day with the other hikers to show them where I'd been, there was nothing there. Just empty forest. No foundation, no fire pit, no trail register. The only thing that proved I'd been there was my sleeping bag, which I'd left behind in my panic. We found it lying in a pile of dead leaves right where the old shelter's sleeping platform would have been. I finished my section hike, but I never felt comfortable in any of the shelters after that. I'd pitch my tent instead, always making sure I was with other people. Because if I could spend a night in a shelter that didn't exist anymore, surrounded by hikers who'd been dead for decades, what else was possible out there? Ghost shelters and hungry trees are one thing, but what happens when the person hiking beside you, your own brother, suddenly isn't who you think they are? Kevin's story will make you question everyone you trust on the trail. STRF5ETWIKT. This unsettling account was shared with me by a man named Kevin who had this experience while hiking with his brother in 2015. Kevin's written statement: "My brother Ryan and I have been hiking together since we were kids. We know each other's habits, quirks, and rhythm so well that we can basically predict what the other is going to do. That familiarity is what made what happened in 2015 so absolutely terrifying. We were doing a 3-day section hike through a less traveled part of the AT in Georgia. It was early spring, still cold at night, and we had the trail mostly to ourselves. Perfect conditions for what we thought would be a nice brotherly bonding trip. The first day went great. We covered about 10 miles, set up camp at a designated site, had dinner, and talked until we were too tired to keep our eyes open. Standard hiking trip stuff. Day 2 started off just as well. We were making good time. The weather was beautiful. We were both in high spirits. Around midday, we stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook. Ryan said he needed to use the bathroom and headed off into the woods. I stayed at the overlook, eating my sandwich and enjoying the view. After about 5 minutes, Ryan emerged from the tree line and sat down next to me. "Nice view," he said, pulling out his own lunch. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Ryan said, "I'm thinking we should push on to the next shelter instead of stopping at the planned one. What do you think?" I told him that sounded fine, and we finished our lunch. As we were packing up, I heard a voice call out from the woods behind us. "Kevin, you still there?" It was Ryan's voice. My blood went cold because Ryan was standing right next to me. I turned to look at him, at the person I thought was Ryan, and saw that he was staring back toward the woods with an expression of pure confusion. "Kevin," the voice called again. "Where'd you go, man?" The Ryan standing next to me grabbed my arm. "What the hell is going on?" he whispered. Then Ryan, the real Ryan, emerged from the woods looking around for me. When he saw me standing next to whatever that was, his face went white. "Kevin, get away from that thing," he said, his voice shaking. "That's not me." I looked at the person next to me. It looked exactly like Ryan. Same face, same clothes, same everything. But now that I was really looking, I could see tiny differences. The eyes were slightly too far apart. The smile didn't quite reach the eyes. The way it was standing was too rigid, too perfect, like someone imitating a human without quite understanding how humans naturally stand. "Kevin," the duplicate said, and its voice sounded wrong now, like a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. "Don't listen to that thing. I'm your brother. That's something trying to trick you." I looked between them, my heart pounding. Two identical Ryans, both claiming to be the real one. How was I supposed to know which was which? Then I remembered something. When Ryan and I were kids, we'd made up a code word for emergencies. Something that only the two of us knew, that we'd use to verify our identities if we ever got separated or if someone was pretending to be one of us. It was a dumb kid thing, but we'd kept it up over the years as a private joke. "What's the word?" I asked, looking at the real Ryan. He immediately responded with the correct code word. I won't repeat it here, that's staying between us, but I knew it was him. The duplicate's face changed. The fake smile dropped, and something else showed through. Something that wasn't human at all. Its features started to shift, becoming less defined, like a face made of clay that was melting. Then it turned and walked into the woods. Not in a normal human gait, but in that same too perfect, too rigid manner. Ryan and I didn't discuss it. We just grabbed our packs and got the hell out of there. We hiked the rest of that day without stopping, covering almost 15 miles before we felt safe enough to make camp. Even then, we stayed up all night taking turns keeping watch. The worst part, the next morning, when we packed up to leave, I found footprints around our campsite. 2 sets. One was Ryan's boots. I recognized the tread pattern. The other was identical. Same size, same pattern, same everything. Like the duplicate had stood outside our tent all night, watching us, waiting for another opportunity. We finished that hike, but we've never gone back to that section of trail. And now, whenever we hike together, we constantly verify each other's identities with that code word. Because if something could duplicate Ryan that perfectly, what's to stop it from trying again? What's to stop it from succeeding next time? Sometimes I wonder if the duplicate is still out there, walking that section of trail, waiting for the next set of hikers, watching them, learning them, preparing to become them. And I wonder how many hikers have come across their own duplicates without realizing it. How many have followed the wrong version of their hiking partner into the woods, never to be seen again. At least Kevin had a way to identify the real from the fake. But what Amanda experienced didn't give her any such luxury, just a relentless stalker who followed her for hours, never getting closer, never falling behind, until night fell and it finally revealed what it really wanted. Stua 6:30 Ruho Nivas Trop. This story comes from a solo female hiker named Amanda who experienced this terrifying stalking incident in 2020. Amanda recounts, "I want to start by saying I'm not someone who scares easily. I'm a seasoned hiker. I've traveled alone through remote areas all over the world, and I know how to take care of myself. I carry bear spray and a knife, and I took self-defense classes. I thought I was prepared for anything. I was wrong. In October 2020, I was doing a week-long solo hike through a remote section of the AT in Maine. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, gorgeous foliage, and the trails weren't too crowded since it was late in the season. I was in heaven. On my 3rd day, I stopped at a shelter for lunch. There was one other person there, a man, probably in his 50s, wearing dirty clothes and carrying an old external frame backpack. He didn't say anything when I arrived, just watched me with this intense stare that made my skin crawl. I've encountered weird people on trails before, so I just gave him a polite nod, kept my distance, and ate my lunch quickly. The whole time he didn't take his eyes off me, didn't say a word, didn't eat, didn't drink, just stared. When I finished eating, I packed up my stuff and headed back to the trail. I looked back once and saw him standing at the shelter entrance, still watching me. I picked up my pace and put some distance between us. Here's where it gets scary. About an hour later, I stopped to take a photo of a particularly beautiful view. As I was lining up the shot, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. It was him, the man from the shelter. He was maybe 50 yards behind me on the trail, moving at the same pace I was. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe we just happened to be hiking in the same direction. The AT is a linear trail after all, but something felt off. I decided to test it. I took a break, pretending to adjust my bootlaces, and waited to see if he'd pass me. He didn't. He stopped about 30 yards away and just stood there, partially hidden behind a tree, watching. My heart started racing. I got up and continued hiking, moving faster now. Every time I glanced back, he was there, maintaining that same distance, never getting closer but never falling behind either. Just following. I tried everything. I stopped abruptly and turned around, calling out to ask if he needed help. He didn't respond, just stood motionless on the trail. I took a long break at a water source, thinking he'd either pass me or take a different route. He waited. I even tried hiking faster, practically jogging at points, but he somehow kept pace without seeming to hurry. This went on for hours. The sun was starting to set, and I was getting genuinely frightened. I was in a remote section with no cell service, miles from the nearest road, and this stranger had been following me all afternoon. I made a decision. There was a blue blaze side trail coming up that led to a remote tent site. It wasn't on my planned route, but I thought maybe I could lose him there. I took the turn off and hiked quickly to the site, which was empty. I set up my tent as fast as possible, putting it behind some trees so it wasn't visible from the trail. I didn't make a fire. I didn't cook dinner. I just got inside my tent, fully clothed with my boots on, and held my bear spray and knife, and I waited. Around 9 p.m. I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the leaves. They circled my tent once, twice, 3 times. Then they stopped right outside my tent door. I could hear breathing, heavy, raspy breathing, and then, in a voice that sounded like it was being forced through gravel, he spoke. "I know you're in there." I didn't respond. I just gripped my bear spray tighter, finger on the trigger. "You can't hide from me. I can smell you. I've been smelling you all day." My stomach turned. This wasn't just some creepy hiker. This was something else entirely. The footsteps started again, but this time they sounded wrong. They weren't walking in a circle anymore. They were pacing back and forth right in front of my tent, but the rhythm was off: step, step, pause, step, step, pause, like someone walking on 2 legs but not quite getting the motion right. Then came scratching. Long, slow scratches against the fabric of my tent. Not like fingers, like something harder, sharper. The sound sent chills down my spine. "Come out," the voice said. "I just want to see you up close. I want to smell you up close." That's when I lost it. I screamed at him to get away, that I had a weapon, that I'd called for help. All lies, but I was desperate. The scratching stopped, the footsteps retreated. And then silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there clutching my bear spray, listening for any sound of his return. When dawn finally broke, I packed up my tent in record time and practically ran back to the main trail. I hiked the entire day without stopping, pushing myself to cover 20 miles until I reached a road crossing where I flagged down a car and asked for a ride to the nearest town. I was done with the hike, done with the trail. I just wanted to get home. I reported the incident to the local authorities, gave them a description of the man, but they never found anyone matching it. They checked the trail register at the shelter where I'd first seen him. There was no entry from that day except mine. The ranger I spoke to did tell me something that made my blood run cold, though. He said there had been reports over the years of hikers, especially solo women, being followed by someone matching that description. Always the same pattern, following at a distance, never quite catching up, eventually circling the victim's tent at night. But no one had ever actually seen the follower in daylight. No other hikers ever reported seeing him. It was always just the victim's word. "If I were you," the ranger said, "I'd count yourself lucky. Not everyone who gets followed makes it out to tell the story." I haven't been back to the Appalachian Trail since. I probably never will. Because now I know that there are things out there that hunt, that follow, that wait for the right moment. And if you're unlucky enough to catch their attention, there's nowhere on that trail you can hide. Oki. Everything we've heard so far, the singing caves, the faceless figures, the hungry tree, the duplicates, the stalkers, they all follow some kind of pattern. But what David discovered in Vermont breaks every rule of reality itself. Sometimes the trail itself becomes the trap. Sto RSEV and TRAOs Tate Melty IPLY. This account comes from an experienced hiker named David, who had this disorienting experience in 2019 while hiking solo through Vermont. David's statement: I've hiked extensively throughout the Appalachian range, and I pride myself on my navigation skills. I don't rely heavily on GPS. I can read a map and compass. I know how to identify landmarks, and I rarely get lost. That confidence almost killed me. I was doing a solo week-long hike through Vermont in September 2019. Beautiful time of year up there. The leaves were just starting to turn. The weather was perfect, and the trails were relatively quiet. I was following the long trail where it overlaps with the AT heading northbound. On day 4, I came to a trail junction. According to my map, the trail split here, with the long trail continuing north and the AT splitting off toward the east. I was planning to stay on the long trail, so I took the northbound trail without much thought. After about 30 minutes of hiking, I came to another junction. But this one wasn't on my map. The trail split 3 ways north, east, and west. There were no signs, no blazes, nothing to indicate which way I should go. I pulled out my compass and map, trying to orient myself. According to my position, there shouldn't be a 3-way junction here. In fact, the trail shouldn't split at all for another 5 miles. But here I was, standing in front of 3 clearly defined trails leading in different directions. I decided to backtrack, figuring I'd somehow missed a turn. But after hiking back for 15 minutes, I came to another junction, not the same one I'd just left, but a different 4-way junction. And once again, it wasn't on my map. Okay, I told myself, trying not to panic. GPS systems can fail. Maps can be outdated. I'll just pick a direction and follow it until I reach a landmark I recognize. I chose what I thought was south based on my compass reading. After an hour of hiking, I should have reached a road that crosses the trail. Instead, I came to another junction. This one had 7 different trails branching off in all directions, like spokes on a wheel. Now I was genuinely worried. I'd been hiking the Appalachian range for 20 years, and I'd never seen trail systems like this. Multiple junctions in areas where there should only be a single path. It didn't make sense. I tried calling for help on my cell phone, no service, which wasn't unusual in this area. I tried my emergency whistle, blowing 3 sharp blasts. No response. I was completely alone. I picked another trail at random and started hiking. This time I paid careful attention to my surroundings, marking trees with chalk so I'd know if I was going in circles. After 2 hours I came to yet another junction, and I could see my chalk marks on the trees surrounding it. I'd somehow looped back to where I'd been, despite hiking in what should have been a straight line and marking my path. That's when I started to seriously consider that I might die out here. As the sun began to set, I made a decision. I would set up camp right there at the junction, wait for daylight, and try to signal for help. Maybe a ranger patrol would come by, or maybe I'd be able to see landmarks from a high point that would help me orient myself. I pitched my tent, made dinner, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. I was rationing my food carefully now, aware that I might be stuck longer than planned. As darkness fell, I climbed into my sleeping bag and tried to rest. Around midnight I woke up to voices, multiple voices all talking at once, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. They seemed to be coming from all around me, from all 7 of the trail branches. I unzipped my tent and looked out. What I saw made me question my sanity. On each of the 7 trails there was a figure with a lantern. 7 identical figures, all holding old-fashioned oil lanterns, all standing motionless at the head of their respective trails. And I called out, "Can you help me? I'm lost." All 7 figures beckoned to me simultaneously, gesturing for me to follow them down their trails. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, like watching the same person reflected in 7 mirrors. I didn't move. Something about this was profoundly wrong. These weren't rescuers. They were something else entirely. "Follow," they all said in unison, their voices overlapping into a discordant chorus. Follow, 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 follow. The word repeated, echoing from all 7 directions, building in volume until it was almost deafening. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my head. Follow do. I closed my eyes and screamed at them to stop. The silence that followed was absolute and immediate. When I opened my eyes again, the figures were gone. The trails were empty. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat in my tent holding my knife, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I packed up my gear and made a decision. I wasn't going to try to navigate out anymore. I was going to pick one direction and just walk, ignoring any junctions, ignoring any trails that branched off. I would walk in a straight line until I hit a road, a town, or something that made sense. I picked south by my compass and started walking. I didn't stay on any established trail. I just pushed through the woods, going around obstacles but always maintaining my southern heading. It was exhausting, slow going, but I was committed. After 6 hours of hiking, I emerged onto a paved road. A real, actual road with cars on it. I flagged down the first vehicle I saw, and the driver, a local farmer, gave me a ride to the nearest town. When I described where I'd been, the farmer gave me a strange look. That area's got a reputation, he said. Locals don't go hiking there. Too many people get lost, even experienced folks. Some say the woods themselves are wrong there, that the trails move around, lead you in circles. My grandfather used to say it was fairy roads, paths that exist between this world and another. Said if you followed those paths, you'd end up somewhere you couldn't come back from. I never did figure out what happened to me out there. I've looked at satellite images of the area, and there's no network of trails like what I experienced. Just the one trail, the long trail going straight through. I've gone back twice since then, in daylight, with other hikers. I've tried to find that first junction where things went wrong. It's not there. The trail just goes straight through. No junctions, no split paths, nothing. But I know what I experienced was real. I have the timestamps on my GPS unit showing me getting lost for nearly 18 hours. I have the photos I took of those impossible junctions. And I still have nightmares about those 7 figures with their lanterns, all beckoning me to follow them deeper into those woods. Whatever was in those woods, whatever created those impossible trails, it's still there, waiting for the next hiker who's confident in their navigation skills. The next person who thinks they're too experienced to get lost. If you're hiking in Vermont and you come to a trail junction that isn't on your map, don't take it. Don't follow it to see where it goes. Just turn around and go back the way you came. Because some paths don't lead to anywhere you want to go. They lead to places where the rules of reality don't quite apply, where the woods themselves can trap you in an endless maze of trails that shouldn't exist. And whatever you do, don't follow the lanterns. Toki. David escaped those impossible trails through sheer determination and refusing to follow the rules of a place where rules didn't apply. But our final story reveals something even more chilling, an entity that doesn't just trap hikers or follow them. It systematically eliminates them, one by one, until it's the only thing left on the trail. Our final story comes from an emergency dispatcher named Christine, who received a series of calls that she says still haunt her years later. This incident occurred in 2022. Christine's account: I've been working as a 911 dispatcher for 12 years. I've taken calls about everything you can imagine: accidents, crimes, medical emergencies. I thought I'd heard it all, but the calls I received on August 14, 2022 were unlike anything in my career. It started at 11:47 p.m. A man called, sounding out of breath and panic. He said he was hiking the Appalachian Trail alone, and that he was being followed by the last hiker. He kept repeating that phrase, the last hiker, the last hiker. I asked him to clarify, to describe who was following him. He said he'd been hiking all day and had planned to camp at a shelter. But when he got there, all the other hikers were gone. Not just gone, their gear was still there, their tents still set up, their food still in their packs, but no people. He'd thought maybe they'd gone to get water or use the bathroom, so he'd waited. An hour passed then too. The sun had set, and still no one came back. That's when he noticed something strange. There were footprints in the dirt around the shelter. Lots of them, all leading away into the woods in the same direction. Like everyone had gotten up simultaneously and walked off into the forest. He'd followed the footprints with his flashlight. They led deep into the woods, off any established trail, going in a straight line toward nothing in particular. After about half a mile, the footprints stopped, just ended in the middle of the forest, with no indication of where the people had gone. He'd gone back to the shelter, and that's when he saw it. Another set of footprints, fresh ones made while he'd been following the others. These prints circled the shelter, walked up to each tent and pack, then led back into the woods in a different direction. Something had been there while he was gone, had examined all the abandoned belongings, had walked right past his own pack. He'd packed up his gear as fast as he could and started hiking, trying to get to a road or anywhere with cell service. That's when he started hearing footsteps behind him, always the same distance away, matching his pace exactly. When he stopped, they stopped. When he ran, they ran. I tried to keep him calm, asking for his location so I could send help. He gave me a description of where he thought he was, but it was vague. He'd been panicking and wasn't sure exactly where he'd deviated from the main trail. I dispatched park rangers to search for him, keeping him on the line. He kept walking, kept talking to me, describing what he was seeing. He said the forest was too quiet, no insects, no animals, no wind. Just his footsteps and the footsteps behind him. Then his voice changed, got quiet, frightened. He said he could see something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the trail, illuminated by his headlamp. It was wearing hiking gear, backpack, boots, the works. But it was just standing there, motionless. "Sir," I said, "can you go around it? Can you talk to it?" He approached slowly. As he got closer, he realized what he was seeing. The figure wasn't standing, it was suspended, hanging in midair with no visible support, just hovering about 2 feet off the ground. "It's one of them," he whispered. "One of the hikers from the shelter. I recognize his backpack." I asked if the person was injured, if they needed medical help. That's when he started screaming. "His feet aren't touching the ground! He's hanging in the air and his eyes are open, and he's not breathing, but he's still moving. His head is turning. He's looking at me!" The call cut off. Just dead air. I immediately tried calling back, but there was no answer. The rangers I dispatched radioed in. They were still 15 minutes from the general area he'd described. 3 minutes later, my phone rang again. Same number. I answered immediately. "Sir, are you okay?" What happened? But the voice that responded wasn't his. It was similar but wrong, like someone doing an impression who'd never actually heard a human voice before. It said, "There are no more hikers." "Only me? I am the last." "Who is this?" I demanded. "Where is the man who called?" "He is with the others now," the voice said, waiting, walking. "Soon I will be the last hiker here too. Then I will move to the next trail, the next hikers. I'm always the last. I make sure I'm the last." The call disconnected. When rangers finally reached the area, they found the shelter exactly as the caller had described, tents set up, gear everywhere, but no people. They followed the footprints into the woods and found 6 hikers standing in a clearing, just standing there, staring at nothing, completely unresponsive. They had to physically carry them out. The hikers were alive but catatonic, unable or unwilling to speak. They were hospitalized, and it took days before any of them could communicate. Even then, they couldn't remember what had happened. The last thing any of them recalled was going to sleep in the shelter. They had no memory of getting up, walking into the woods, or anything that had happened after. The man who had called me was never found. Search and rescue teams combed the area for days. They found his backpack hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. His phone was inside, completely dead, even though it had been fully charged when he called me. They found footprints. His boots matched some of them. But there were other prints too. Dozens of them, all the same size, all going in different directions, all stopping abruptly in the middle of nowhere, like the people making them had simply vanished. I listened to the recording of those calls hundreds of times. The department brought in specialists, people who analyze voice patterns. They confirmed what I already knew: the voice in that second call wasn't human. The patterns were wrong, the intonation was off. It was something mimicking human speech without understanding how humans actually talk. And here's what keeps me up at night. I've received 2 more calls since then. Different numbers, different hikers, different sections of the Appalachian Trail, but always the same pattern. Someone calling to report that all the other hikers have disappeared, that they're being followed, that they've seen something impossible. And always, after the call cuts off, I get a second call. Always that same wrong voice saying the same thing. I am the last hiker. I've tried warning people. I've reported it up the chain, contacted trail organizations, even posted about it online. But what can I tell them? That there's something on the Appalachian Trail that makes hikers disappear. That there's an entity that systematically hunts down everyone on a section of trail until it's alone. That it calls itself the last hiker and moves from area to area, clearing out hikers like someone erasing marks on a chalkboard. Who would believe that? Even with the recordings, even with the missing persons reports. It sounds crazy. But I know what I heard. And I know that somewhere on the Appalachian Trail right now, there's a hiker who's about to become the last. Who's about to find themselves alone with abandoned campsites and 2 quiet woods. Who's about to hear footsteps behind them that match their pace exactly. And I know that when their call comes in, there's nothing I'll be able to do to save them. Because you can't outrun the last hiker. You can't hide from it. Once it's chosen you, once you've become aware that you're alone, you're already gone. You just don't know it yet. So if you're planning to hike the Appalachian Trail, I have one piece of advice: never, ever let yourself be the last hiker in your group. Don't linger when others leave. Don't stay behind at a shelter while your companions hike ahead. And if you find yourself alone at a campsite with all the gear still there, but no people, don't wait to see what took them. Just run. Run and don't look back. Because the last hiker is always watching, always waiting. And once it has you, you'll end up just like all the others, standing in a forest clearing, staring at nothing, with no memory of how you got there or what you've become. Or worse, you won't end up anywhere at all. You'll just be gone. And the only trace of you will be your backpack hanging impossibly high in a tree, and your voice on a 911 call that no one will want to believe is real. Those were 8 terrifying accounts from the Appalachian Trail. Before we go, I want to ask for your help one more time. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers here on Park Ranger Files, and your subscription means everything to our ability to continue researching and documenting these encounters. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. I also want to hear from you. Have you hiked the Appalachian Trail? Have you experienced anything you couldn't explain? Do you have a theory about any of the stories we've covered today? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps this channel grow, and you might even see your comment or story featured in a future video. This has been Park Ranger Files. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, some trails are meant to be walked alone, but some should never be walked at all.